Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Matt Springfield, and I am a product marketing manager here at CData, and I'm excited to get into the topic of data integration for Couchbase, which is a topic that orbits around Couchbase without being Couchbase itself, but it's likely to come up as a practical concern if you're interested in using Couchbase as your data storage solution. Now, I want to note right here at the top, I'm going to be mentioning Couchbase Cloud a lot. There's a lot of well-deserved buzz around Couchbase Cloud, but if you are using Couchbase on-premise or you're interested in Couchbase on-premise, essentially the same principles apply. Just wanted to call that out at the front. All right. So before I get too far into things, let me share with you the outline of what I'm talking about today. I want to start here with the why question that motivates this entire presentation. And that why question is, why is data integration such an important subject when we talk about Couchbase? The second thing I want to talk about is an overview of how CData simplifies data integration, especially for platforms like Couchbase Cloud. Then I want to highlight a particular CData tool called CData Sync and explain why we think this is a particularly powerful companion to Couchbase Cloud. And then to really drive that point home, I'll be doing a live demo of CData Sync where I'll configure a working integration with Couchbase Cloud and my local SQL Server instance as an example in real time. And finally, I'll return to some of these key takeaway points to wrap up. So let's get right into it. So you want to use Couchbase Cloud, and for good reasons. After all, modern businesses depend on data for many things. Things like making intelligent business decisions, optimizing resource distribution, growing effectively. And because of all this dependence on data, you have a really important decision to make when it comes to your data storage solution. So modern data storage solutions like Couchbase Cloud provide benefits that any forward-looking enterprise organization ought to be interested in. These benefits include scalability. So it's well known that cloud-hosted solutions offer unmatched scalability so that your data storage capacity grows as your business grows. And best of all, you don't actually have to actively intervene to make sure the scalability happens. It's this natural outcome of virtual cloud clusters. Speaking of virtual clusters, that brings us to the second benefit here, availability. Cloud-hosted infrastructure has redundancy, highly available deployments, and you're never on the hook for rescuing a server that goes down or stranding yourself if your customers go without access to all of your important data. And finally, performance. Modern businesses generate, really an absurd amount of data per year, and that rate of data generation is not likely to slow down anytime soon. And when you're dealing with all of this massive data, you really don't want your data storage solution to choke and slow down all of the things that you want to do with your data. There's plenty more that I could go on about here, but I suspect you'll be hearing plenty about the benefits of Couchbase and Couchbase Cloud elsewhere, so I won't belabor the point too much. The upshot is, you have a pretty good reason to be interested in Couchbase Cloud. But there's a problem, and that's data fragmentation, and how it gets in the way of using your preferred data storage solution like Couchbase Cloud. Because for any data storage solution, you need to centralize all of your data in that data storage solution in Couchbase Cloud to make good use of it. But your data is very likely hard to centralize because it's fragmented. In recent years, you might have noticed there's been a data ecosystem explosion. If you count all the CRM systems, ERP systems, accounting, marketing hubs, relational databases, data lakes, warehouses, the list really goes on. In fact, it's been estimated that enterprise organizations can use upwards of 100 different applications and systems to manage and store all of their data. So your data is in quite a few different places, and you need to funnel it all into the one place where you want it, where it makes the most sense, where it's the most accessible and effective for you, which is, in this case, Couchbase Cloud. To make matters worse, some of these solutions that you're using, all the different places your data is scattered, some of these are going to be on-premise, others are in the cloud, and you have to figure out some way of bridging that gap. So it's not just all over the place, it's not even all that straightforward to make your various data platforms talk to each other. And since your data is so scattered, you might wonder why that's such a problem. Well, it's really difficult to get this 360-degree view of your data that we all want. That helps you relate your data to each other, gather business insights, fully understand your customers, the customer journey, and really make optimal use of your data storage solution like Couchbase Cloud. So it's about time that I bring up CData, the company I work for, and why we work so well with Couchbase. If you haven't heard of us, we're a worldwide organization. We've been around for about 20 years, and much of our focus is on solving the problem of data fragmentation that I just mentioned. So let's talk about how we do that. So we solve data fragmentation through data connectivity and data integration. Our tools provide reliable and convenient connectivity to over 200 different data sources, and these data sources include that list that I kind of mentioned earlier, so CRMs, ERPs, accounting, marketing systems, databases, and so on. And we provide this connectivity in three major ways, so I'll briefly cover these three different ways, and then I'll focus in on one of these ways for the rest of the presentation. So first, we provide live data connectivity through our drivers. These drivers are also sometimes called connectors or providers, depending on the platform that you're in. So like in .NET, they're providers, Java, they're drivers, and so on. These drivers provide live connectivity by translating standard data queries, and those are usually SQL, into the appropriate API requests to communicate with API-driven data sources. So in other words, we do live translation between SQL and APIs so that you can talk to APIs using SQL. So, as a result, anything or anyone that can speak SQL can now speak directly to all of these 200 plus different enterprise applications and solutions. And of course, Couchbase is the natural example here. It's a NoSQL database solution or data storage solution. And so you couldn't normally speak SQL to it, but we provide that translation step so that you can. And in case you're having a hard time picturing how these drivers are used, we find that the two most common spheres in which they're helpful are within BI and reporting tools that don't have native connectivity, but of course can make these standard data queries. And the second is for programmers and data scientists who are maybe building their own solutions or using SQL, but they don't want to spend all their time learning API after API. All right, so that's our first approach. And our next one is data replication, which we provide primarily through CData sync. This is the one I'll be focusing on for the rest of the presentation, but I'll give a brief overview here. Sync is built on top of those drivers and connectors that I just described, so it has the same breadth of connectivity, but it's a standalone application rather than these translation tools. And additionally, it has a bunch of features layered on top of this pure connectivity that make it easy to replicate data. Since I'm going to go into more detail, I'll just leave that here for now. The third and final approach is building custom workflows with a tool called CData ArcESB. ArcESB is a workflow canvas and a suite of tools that you can add to this canvas and configure to build these custom data pipelines, and these can become as complex as you need. So ArcESB really shines when the name of the word of the day is complexity. ArcESB, of course, leverages the same CData connectivity that I've been talking about, but it emphasizes a few other things. It emphasizes B2B communication, EDI mapping, other file format translations like CSV, JSON, and so on. And logical operations like branching workflows and performing lookups. So for instance, if you want to insert some data, but you only have the account name, you need the internal account ID, you need to go look up that ID based on the name. So ArcESB provides these additional logical steps as well as B2B communication and file mapping. Okay, but that's not what we're here to focus on. We're here to focus on CData sync. So this is a great companion to Couchbase Cloud. Sync provides intelligent incremental data replication from as many disparate data sources as you want and centralizes them in one platform, such as Couchbase Cloud. And I mentioned that a big problem with using a modern data storage solution like Couchbase Cloud is that your data is all over the place and you need to centralize it. Well, CData sync sets up these automated jobs so that no matter where your data is coming from, it can all end up in Couchbase without you having to worry about it, without you having to do manual interventions or anything else. As a note, the incremental part of incremental data replication means that sync only ever updates data that's new or changed, so you're not like rebuilding all your tables every time or anything crazy like that. Since sync is an end user application, and since we envision plenty of citizen analysts and non-programmers interacting with it, there's a big emphasis on ease of use and accessibility. Since I'm going to demo this product in just a bit, you'll see for yourself, and you can decide for yourself if you agree with me. But the idea here is that everything becomes much simpler when you abstract away the details of a particular connection or a data source. So the process of setting up replication jobs is really just a matter of filling in some connection parameters and setting some tables and selecting some columns. So this is even simpler than the drivers that I mentioned a bit ago. You don't even have to know what SQL is because sync already knows what kinds of SQL queries would be required to replicate data. And then of course it also knows how to translate those pseudo SQL queries into API requests to talk to whatever platform you need. And additionally, since these connection-specific details are abstracted away, the process for setting up replication jobs is essentially the same, no matter what data source you're using. So onboarding time for new jobs is practically negligible. The process for adding new data sources, connecting new pipelines for your data is the same process that you're used to, that you've done before for other platforms. So really, nobody who's involved with configuring CData Sync needs to know any of the technical details of the data source that they're using, because CData Sync has that understanding of what data queries are required and then how to make those data queries intelligible to whatever system that you're interacting with. Because of this simplicity and the ease of use and the accessibility, we think this is a really great product to highlight alongside Couchbase Cloud. It cuts down on the time and the cost that you might think is involved in switching to a new data storage solution or adding a data storage solution to your existing ecosystem. You really don't want to have to rip and replace what you've got. You don't want to have to teach people a bunch of new skills. You don't want to have to figure out how to bridge the premise and cloud gap. You just want to make sure your data ends up in Couchbase Cloud and start using it. And for that, CData Sync is this perfect companion. And finally, before I hop right into the demo, it's worth mentioning that Sync is excellent for bridging that cloud to premise divide. Sync has both an on-premise and an in-cloud option. The cloud option is through AWS or Azure Marketplace. And so it provides that cloud-to-cloud, pure cloud integration if you're interested, or it can bridge the gap by residing in your own network. All right, so that's enough PowerPoint for the moment. I'm going to hop right into CData Sync so you can see it for yourself. And we're going to perform a live integration with Couchbase Cloud and my local little SQL Server instance that I mentioned. So let's do that. All right, so here is CData Sync. You can see, first of all, that it's a web-based application. It's running on top of a web server. We can see it's in my browser here. And I want to call out a few of the tabs that we're going to be using to show off this integration. So here we are in the status tab. This is just giving us an overview of the application. We're not going to spend too much time here, but here it is when you want to look at it. The two tabs that we're most worried about, most interested in, are the connection tabs and the jobs tabs. And I'll mention the other tabs right at the end here, but let's go ahead and talk about these. So the connections tab is where we establish our connections to various data sources and data destinations. And you can see there's a list of possible sources and destinations here. But I do want to quickly use this opportunity to shout out really the true breadth of connectivity that CData offers. This is just a introductory list of data sources you can use. If you don't see your preferred data source here, I do want to quickly show this off. So from this little modal, you can download the ability to connect to all of these various different data platforms. So, I'll just scroll through it here so you can get a sense of the breadth that we're talking about. All right, so once you select the data source that you're interested in, you'll create a connection. Now, I did say I was going to perform this integration live. The one way I've cheated a little bit is I've already set up these connections. I didn't think anybody wanted to watch me type in any connection parameters, but I'll show you what these look like. So first of all, we have our Couchbase connection. So you can see, like I mentioned, that I've already typed in the connections here. Connection properties here, but hopefully you can see that establishing a connection is really just a matter of entering a few simple values. If you're not sure what values should go in what spot, I did want to call out this documentation link. This will provide you with some extra information about what CData Sync is expecting in each of these configurable properties. And in fact, this was especially helpful for connecting to to Couchbase Cloud, because there are a few special things that you need to use when you're connecting to a cloud instance, and that's all specified there in the documentation link. So we're quickly going to test this connection, and as long as nothing strange happens, we're going to connect to Couchbase Cloud. This is just checking to make sure that we can communicate, so everything is looking good. All right, our second connection here is this SQL connection, and like I mentioned, this is connecting to a local SQL Server instance on my machine. Got some very basic test data here, obviously not really an enterprise database setup, but it will pretty effectively communicate the point here, and we'll just make sure again that we've got a working connection, and that's great. I do also have this Salesforce connection. We're not going to use that here, but hopefully that helps give you a sense that you could create a variety of different connections and use each of those different connections in various jobs as you need. But for right now, we're going to take it away from this connections panel. We've got our two necessary connections all set up, and head over to the Jobs tab. All right, so the Jobs tab is where we take our existing and working connections, and we specify what data in the data source needs to be replicated to what table in the data destination. And you might think to yourself that table is a strange word to use there, since if you know Couchbase Cloud is a NoSQL database, you know it doesn't have tables, it has buckets. But we use table here as sort of a more abstract term, right? Capturing both tables and buckets, relational and non-relational data sources or data structures. Excuse me. And so we're going to be replicating tables from the source into the destination. So you can see I don't have any jobs set up here. Like I said, we're going to configure this live and right in front of you. So let's go ahead and add a new job to replicate my SQL Server data into Couchbase. So we'll give it a nice simple name, maybe SQL to Couchbase. Our source data is, of course, that SQL connection that we just tested, and our destination is this Couchbase connection. So we'll go ahead and create this job. Now, these jobs are based around tables. So the main question you're asking yourself when you're making a new job is what table in the source should end up in the destination, and what data structure should it end up in. So to get this job started, I'm going to go ahead and add a new table here. So what this is doing is it's looking at my local SQL Server instance, and it's just asking it with this metadata query, hey, what tables are available? And it's going to list them here. So I don't have to tell Sync anything about my environment. It's going to go ahead and learn for itself what is available. You can see I have a few simple test tables up here. I have a bunch of system tables. Of course, SQL Server returns all the system tables as well. Don't care about those. Let's just select this leads table as the data that we're going to replicate. So this is saying, hey, all that leads information that I have in my local instance, let's make sure that that ends up in Couchbase. All right, so that's successful. And to dive a little bit further into it, the next question we want to ask ourselves is, okay, I've selected the table that's going to be replicated. Where is it replicated to? What bucket or table in Couchbase is going to store this data after the replication? So to do that, we'll click on here and look at it. And so the first thing I want you to notice is that Sync tries to detect as much as it can from the data source and data destination that you're using. So it knows about my keys and my indexes. It knows, of course, my table name. I just selected that. But then also, this is the destination table here on the right. You notice that it automatically detected that there is a bucket or table called leads in Couchbase. Of course, I set that up for the purpose of this demo. And it automatically selected that. But in case the auto detect isn't quite able to tell what you want, you can, of course, create new tables or buckets in this case, or choose the existing bucket that you want to map to. So once again, so now it's connecting to Couchbase Cloud and looking for my buckets. So again, you don't have to tell Sync anything about your environment anytime it's necessary. It's just going to go ask Couchbase Cloud, hey, what buckets are available? And in this case, I only have 2 for my test little instance, and that leads bucket is just fine. All right. Oh, actually, really quick, before we leave too far away from this, another thing that you might be interested in this particular modal is once you've selected the table that you're going to replicate and where it should end up, you might be interested in how the columns are mapped. Now, again, there aren't actually columns in a bucket-driven NoSQL data storage solution, but of course we're using that word in more abstractly. And in this case, I've set up my bucket so that the mapping is very simple. The column names are the same. But if Sync isn't able to detect how you want to name or store your data in the destination, you can use these drop-downs and edit your mapping so that the data from your source ends up in the appropriate, quote-unquote column in your destination. So this looks good for me, and we're going to go ahead and hit OK. All right, so we're going to save our changes. Our job is successfully saved, and now we're going to go ahead and run this. So what have I done here? I said connect to SQL Server, take the leads table, replicate it, only new and changed data in that table to my leads bucket in Couchbase. So we'll go ahead and run this. So it's beginning execution, it's running, and assuming nothing strange happens, yes, there we go. Completed successfully. 1 record was affected, so we had 1 new or changed record that was updated, that was synchronized from my local instance to Couchbase Cloud. Now, obviously, when you're actually using Sync, you don't want to have to come in and manually run these jobs. That would defeat the purpose of having this nice, slick, running in the background automation. So most likely what you're going to want to do is come over here to the Schedule tab and enable the scheduler. So this, of course, gives you the ability to specify an interval. And it can be as simple as every hour, every day. If you want to get really crazy, you can specify a cron expression and do some advanced time magic. But the point here, of course, is that when you're using sync, you don't want to have to worry about your replication jobs. You want to set them up once using these simple drop-down options and then automate them so that you can just be consistently confident that your data ends up in Couchbase without you having to intervene. All right, and so that's actually it. I've set up my connection. I could talk to SQL in Couchbase. I set up my job. I said, here's the data in SQL that I want to end up in Couchbase. And theoretically, I set up my scheduler so that it happens whenever I want. And that's it. Now, I've used particularly simple data for this example, but the important thing to realize is even as your data grows in complexity, the complexity of setting up CData sync does not. So if I checked more tables, if I checked more columns, if I added more connections and had multiple different data platforms all funneling data into Couchbase at the same time, none of that changes how I interact with CData sync. The same process of going to a particular connection, choosing particular tables, and scheduling the automated replication is all the same. So I really want to highlight this because this is why we chose CData sync to show off today. It's such a good companion to Couchbase Cloud because of the accessibility, because of the low barrier to entry. I don't have to know anything about SQL to use this application. All I need to know is a few connection parameters like a user and a password for SQL on Couchbase Cloud, and I can make sure that all of my data ends up in Couchbase Cloud. Now, before I hop right out of CData sync, I did want to briefly mention this transformations tab. This is not something that I'm going to be showing off today, but since it's here, I figured I would mention it. The transformations is more of an advanced feature that allows you to manipulate data as it's being replicated. This generally happens through standard data queries like those in SQL. So again, this is a bit beyond the scope of what I'm covering here. But if you do have more complex needs, if the replication job isn't quite as simple as just take the data and stick it in the destination, then you can, of course, use your data experts that know SQL to perform these standard manipulation and transformation queries to make sure the data looks however you need it to look. So that's it for our look at CData sync. Hopefully that gave you a sense of how simple it is to set up these set up these replication jobs so that when you switch to Couchbase Cloud, you don't have to worry about getting your data there. You can let CData sync do that for you. All right, to round it out here, I do want to just highlight a few of the key takeaways for the afternoon. First, CData's role in this Couchbase conversation is to eliminate that friction that comes from switching data storage solutions or maybe adding a new data storage solution as part of your data ecosystem. So what we imagine is you're interested in Couchbase Cloud, but you might be worried about the overhead of switching or adding Couchbase Cloud, and during that transition, CData can step in and make sure that it's easy for you. Second, I wanted to highlight that CData sync is the particular tool that we wanted to talk about because of its accessibility, because of its simplicity. It makes sure that you don't need to tax your IT resources to ensure that your data ends up in your preferred data storage solution, which in this case is Couchbase Cloud. And finally, our main goal at CData at the end of the day is to ensure that data connectivity and data integration challenges don't get in the way of your data management. So in the case of Couchbase, we want to make sure that you have the freedom to use a modern data storage solution without worrying about the added friction in your data ecosystem from the switch. So that's all I have prepared for you today. If you're interested in anything that you've seen, then please don't hesitate to visit us at cdata.com. If you have any questions, then please do reach out to us at sales@cdata.com, and we can make sure that that message reaches the right ears. So with that, thank you so much for attending, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.